My presentation is entitled Down the Elevator to Hades from Virgil to the Magicians. While the show is based on a set of novels published by Lev Grossman between 2009 and 2014, I've chosen to focus solely on the small screen TV adaptation from Sci-Fi, which aired for 5 seasons between 2015 and 2020. The medium provides an interesting framework through which to compare Virgil's ancient works, the Georgics, Eclogues, and Aeneid, and a personally relatable framework for me, since the characters face their challenges while simultaneously being graduate students in a chaotic world. Before I begin, let me note a content warning for possibly coarse language and a minimally graphic death scene. I shall argue that, in looking back to the Virgilian canon, one can find reverberating themes in The Magicians, which is by no means a modern retelling of any of Virgil's 3 works. 2 main elements, fate, as well as the idealized pastoral world of Virgil and the magician's Fillory, allow for a comparative framework to be built, from which follows then several further connections. After understanding the parallel elements, I investigate a specific scene from season 2, episode 11 of The Magicians, in which Quentin Coldwater, the show's protagonist, and his lifelong best friend Julia Wicker travel to the show's version of the underworld, which contains some of the series' strongest Virgilian echoes. I will draw final connections in the show's only other main visit to the underworld from season 4, episode 13, when Quentin tragically dies. This investigation aims to show how the carefully chosen Virgilian inversions in the magician's underworld stories can help us better experience the show's fantastical world. I believe that undertaking a reception study is especially useful for a show like The Magicians, whose mythical and magical world, while heavily influenced by Western elements, do more fully incorporate world mythology into a fictional Earth where magic exists. For example, there are jinn genies from Arabic myth, Slavic witches, and a reliance on multiple languages to cast spells, not just the common arcane Latin. Furthermore, in terms of classical reception, and by this I mean literature from ancient Rome and Greece, I use as a helpful frame the work of James 2008, quoted in Rhea 2022, and Rogers and Stevens 2018, among others. Certain basic connections between the stories drew me to consider their more overarching parallels. First, Aeneas is a wanderer, a fato profugus, who journeys about the Mediterranean to set the foundations for the Roman race. Quentin, too, is a wanderer in some sense, admitting this as his deepest secret. My friend Julia said that I couldn't run away hard enough. She's right. I run and I find secret doors. There's also the role of emotional pain and trauma in both stories. It's widely documented how the epic's first six books tend to end with deaths of those close to the hero. The Magicians uses pain in a different way, establishing within its first season that one major source of mortals' magical power is pain itself. Further, the Aeneid's place inside of its larger mythical and epic world is paralleled by the Magician's place inside of a world powered by its own mythology, as well as science fiction and fantasy. There are numerous references to major works such as Harry Potter, Doctor Who, and the Chronicles of Narnia, the last of which is cited by Grossman as his main inspiration. Furthermore, I'll briefly discuss the role of fate, one element connecting the 2 worlds. For Virgil, fate is most prominently explored in the Aeneid. Though he strays from his fate, Aeneas in effect has little to no choice concerning his journey's telos. This is a topic much discussed by Virgilian scholars. To what extent does Virgil portray Aeneas as having free will? Instead of making an entry into this argument, I'll instead just touch on a few aspects that seem to control fate, which Jenkins calls divinely willed determinations. First, the epic's proem lays out in its hero's destiny, conduit urbem, to found a city. No matter what, this will happen. There's also the constant string of dreams, omens, and prophecies in which Aeneas constantly receives instructions on what he should do next. It can't be overlooked how woefully bad Aeneas is at listening early on. Yet once the hero can finally accept what he's being told, his actions do align with his fate. Finally, Jupiter's interference is perhaps the most commanding position of fate, as he's often the speaker of reality in 3 key ways. His reassuring conversations with Venus, his final conversation with Juno to assuage her anger by blotting out the Trojan name, and his dispatch of Mercury to prod Aeneas into leaving Carthage. Thus, with so many pivotal elements of the story controlled by the immortal gods, despite the mortal Aeneas's actions to fulfill his own fate, it leaves the question tending toward an answer. The Magician similarly leaves its viewers questioning the existence and role of free will in its mythical universe. While there are indeed some gods present, they are not the arbiters of fate. However, the mortal-run enterprise of the Library of the Netherlands, controlled by the ominously named group of the Order, does in essence hold the fate of all mortals. While we learn early on that the library contains the book of all mortals' life stories, we later discover that Cassandra, of ancient Greek mythical fame, is still churning out prophecies after being commercialized by the Order. Jane Chatwin also created Time Loops. The show takes place in the 40th, centered around Quentin, whom she calls the volunteer tomato who must always perform his fate. There are minimal examples of challenging fate in the show. For example, in season 4, episode 5, when Alice, having read Quentin's book, prevents his death at the hands of the monster inhabiting Elliot's body. But scenes such as Sylvia's death in the poison room, where she reads about her own impending death, confirm it's more likely that the books will be accurate. There's also a shared element of primitivism in both works. On the one hand, Virgil's rustic eclogues, the agricultural lands of his Georgics, and Evander and Latinus's primitive Italy, all present landscapes more idealized than Virgil's real world. There's also the references to the nearly fantastical Arcadia and its goat god Pan, as well as the mythical beasts and monsters populating the Mediterranean, which provide the story with non-human elements that propel the narrative. On the other hand, The Magicians is itself built around the world of Fillory. Presented as a non-industrial, idealized alternative to 2010's Earth, when it's not being ruled by the beast. It too has goat gods, Ember and Umber, and non-human elements like questing creatures who propel the storyline. Even the role of Labor in connection to idealized primitive lands and the resurgence of the Golden Age finds some room in Fillory, when High King Elliot must solve an ongoing famine by introducing manure as fertilizer to the people of Fillory. However, all these connections in the worlds built by Virgil and the showrunners of The Magicians come to a head in the few glimpses of the underworld we receive in the show. It seems that the catabasis of Julia and Quentin in season 2, episode 11, is almost perfectly in line with the catabasis of Aeneas, accounting, of course, for some significant cultural changes. It's secondarily helpful to read both story worlds' other catabases to further see the connections, Virgil's Orpheus and Quentin's death in the Mirror Realm. First, Aeneas's resolution to visit the underworld comes from his father Anchises in a dream. After making his decision, Aeneas must find a not quite human female figure in the form of the Sibyl who will give him instructions and guide him to the underworld. His entry price is the golden bough, which famously hesitates, cunctatem, as he plucks it. Aeneas enters through the cave, Phalces, near Avernus into the holding area along the river, where the ferryman Charon controls crossing. We learn of the underworld's different environs from the Sibyl as they approach Elysium. She distracts the guard dog Cerberus with drugged cakes and has Aeneas continue to the structure Moinia, which stands at the entrance to Elysium. Quentin, on the other hand, learns that he must visit the underworld after Julia's shade visits him in a drug-induced dream. Quentin and Julia go together and find a dragon. This figure too is female, a dragon dwelling in the sewers of New York City. Notably, this dragon is marked with the Greek Ouroboros, which appears always in ancient Greek literature with the word dragon, according to the TLG. They pay their price here, a baby tooth. As determined from the riddle, the old reveals itself to the new at the fall of milk teeth. The dragon allows their souls to enter the underworld through an elevator opening into a hotel lobby. Bremer notes that narrow ingresses are a characteristic mark of the Roman underworld. Further, the stand-in for Charon is the hotel concierge, and the underworld's geography is described as islands modeled after Hawaii. Julia's friend Richard must distract the hotel concierge for Quentin and Julia to gain access to Elysium, where they find a mansion, the home of Hades and Persephone, which houses shades in the form of children. These two parallel underworlds seem shockingly similar, but I find the second strain of comparison, inversion, to be even more telling. The first big change concerns the gifts. While the bow hesitates for Aeneas, Julia pulls out Quentin's baby tooth almost before he's done saying he still has it. Then, upon finding their former loves, both Aeneas and Quentin have radically different experiences. The shade of Dido, Aeneas's former love, wants nothing to do with him, and the heart-wrenching scene ends with her flitting off away from Aeneas after he quote-unquote apologizes. In contrast, the shade of Alice, Quentin's deceased love, eagerly hugs him after Julia finds her, and their reunion is quite pleasant, despite the scene's sad undertones. Here, I find it most relevant to consider Orpheus's catabasis in the Georgics, with his powerful imagery of the backward glance. Orpheus doesn't listen to Persephone. He turns around while exiting the underworld and effects a second death for his beloved Eurydice. First, it recalls the parting scene of Aeneas and Creusa as Troy burned. It is agreed that Aeneas's wife was originally named Eurydice, a connection allowing for a bridge between the stories. When Aeneas fails to turn around and account for his wife in the real world, she dies too. While the Aeneid story demands this to make room for Dido's role, it nevertheless becomes a part of Aeneas's trauma, and his failed run-in with the spurned Dido in the underworld then brings that traumatic past back into focus. The separation of Orpheus and Eurydice is matched by Julia's separation from her own shade, a decision she makes consciously so that she can help her best friend Quentin reunite with Alice. Let's watch that scene now.
You first.
Jules, what the hell?
This isn't up for debate.
We came here so that you could...
Yeah? So? Things change.
If you do this...
I know. This is my one shot. And this is what I want to do with it.
I found them! Stop!
Come on, or we'll lose her too.
You can't take that shade!
It's all going to be okay, Quentin.
This assistance marks an inversion of Orpheus and Eurydice's story. Quentin doesn't visit the underworld to save Alice, and never erroneously turns his back, but still manages to be reunited with his beloved, whose shade Julia takes to the living realm in place of her own. Now, we'll visit the second main catabasis of the magicians, beginning in the pseudo-underworld mirror realm and ending in the true underworld. To prevent Everett from becoming a god and removing access to magic from the masses, Quentin and friends try to toss the bottled up god power into the scene, the link between the universe of the living and the antiverse of lifelessness. Let's watch first, and be aware of the minimally graphic death scene coming up.
Okay. Okay, I get it. Okay.
You always were smarter than the books gave you credit for. It'll be okay, Q. In fact, you'll go down as a hero. I'll make sure of it.
Take her, do it. Now.
No! No!
What did you do?
Minor mending.
Give it to me!
I dedicate my life to promise at all, and I know you'll be there. And I want you to know I care because keep your head up, hold your head up, even though it's cruel. Count your blessings, you won't need it when you're gone. It's cruel. You can't see it, you can't see it, even though it's cruel.
This eerie pseudo-underworld offers a horror movie hell more closely aligned to the Judeo-Christian tradition than to the Aeneid's conception. But it is in the use of the backward glance motif where our connections come back into focus. First, Quentin performs his minor mending behind his back. While some minimal nods to Alice and Penny make them aware he has some plan, it appears to be unspoken that Quentin has dropped his mental wards to let the telepathic Penny know that he will sacrifice himself shortly. As the scene unfolds in slow motion, we watch Penny pull Alice away toward the door. She forces herself to look back in anguish at her love and even stretches out her arms. Not only is this reminiscent of Orpheus's loss of Eurydice, but the outstretched arm also reminds of Aeneas's final loss of Creusa when he attempted to hug her ghost as Troy burned. The cinematography of Quentin's death appears as vanishing, much as Creusa tenuis recessit in auras recedes into the light air. The imagery of Orpheus and Eurydice in the underworld is recalled in the Aeneid scene, which marks essentially Aeneas's final action at Troy, and thus the start of his true journey. So too is the entire premise of the magician's conflict recalled in the final catabasis when the mirror shatters, reminding the avid watcher of the mirror broken in the series' second episode to block the beast's re-entry to Earth. Finally, Aeneas's main reason for visiting the underworld is to consult his father Anchises, who proceeds to provide visions of Rome's future grandeur. While there's never such an intention in the magicians, Quentin nevertheless does learn about the future of his friends upon his death. From the Penny of Timeline 40, who has become a librarian in the underworld, helping people reveal secrets taken to their graves. With this parallel so constructed, I now approach the reason for undertaking this comparative study. For this, I use the inversions I noted above along with displacement theory. The magician's second catabasis marks the death of Quentin, the story's protagonist. However, it's investigated more than once in the show whether we ought to be paying so much heed to Quentin at the expense of others' story arcs, especially in season 4, episode 7, when Penny warns against falling prey to white male protagonism. The Virgilian underworld becomes displaced in the magicians for several cultural reasons, but we can read these cultural changes, maybe, as a sign of good change. In their new volume on ancient epic in film and TV, Potter and Gardner note that the relative gender equality that defines some SF series has allowed female characters to play roles usually assigned to male heroes of ancient epic. The major inversions in the catabases of the magicians fit into this framework. Quentin is essentially powerless when he visits the underworld with Julia. She's assuredly the dominant force who makes the decision to bring Alice back instead of her own shade. The second catabasis is even more telling. Though Quentin dies after setting his own self-sacrifice in motion, Alice takes the position of Orpheus, who returns to the living realm without his love Eurydice, and Aeneas, who leaves behind his Creusa as Troy burns around them. While Quentin learns about his friend's fates after his death, he can't make any use of it. It's no doubt there are issues surrounding gender equality in the world of the magicians, but multiple story arcs, building up in the latter half of season 4 particularly, promote female empowerment, especially those concerning Margot, Fen, and Katie. We even come across matriarchies such as the fairy realm in season 3. We shouldn't devalue Quentin's contribution, however, as Penny notes that Quentin has saved everyone with his sacrifice. Yet, the story continues after his death. Julia even decides to save Fillory from apocalypse in season 5, episode 1, overcoming a questing creature's misogynistic dismissal of her abilities. Underworld Penny's understanding of the way the world should work is an understanding which doesn't equate to our actual modern world. In the show, we can experience a world of whimsy, of magic gods' quests that looks like ours, but could never be ours. It investigates major issues our society faces daily, and we can see these displaced worlds on the small screen. This, I find, is one of the best aspects of science fiction and fantasy, to transport us to worlds at once familiar and distant. Thank you.